I'm Dr. Orion Taraban, and this is PsycHacks, Better Living Through Psychology. And the topic of today's short talk is staying for the kids. This is potentially going to be a controversial episode because there are no easy answers with respect to the circumstances I'm going to describe. However, the issue has come up enough in my consultations and has been requested enough over the years to deserve its own episode. Let's get to it. The crux of the situation is that the man is in a very toxic or abusive marriage. Sometimes this is emotional abuse, yelling, name-calling, controlling, contempt. Sometimes this is physical abuse, hitting, slapping, kicking. And sometimes this is neglect, passive aggression, emotional withdrawal, sexual foreclosure. In such cases, the man typically admits that his marriage is fucked. And it has been fucked for years. But in his very next breath, he tells me that he can't leave because there are children involved. Now, when I ask the guy why this would matter, I typically get one of two responses. On the one hand, they believe that divorce is like inherently bad for children and that the experience will mess them up emotionally or psychologically. And on the other hand, they believe that staying together protects the children, usually in one of two ways. Either staying together means the man can kind of serve as a buffer between the woman and the children that wouldn't exist if he were to lose full custody, or staying together means that some other man won't be raising his children in a blended family stepfather arrangement further down the road. Basically, as bad as their marriages are, these men generally believe that the costs are offset by the protective factor that staying married affords their kids. Again, there are no easy answers here, and not everyone is going to agree with what I'm about to say. But I'm going to spend the rest of this episode responding to these arguments. First and foremost, it's important to understand that divorce is not necessarily bad for children. Like, it's much better for kids if their divorced parents respectfully co-parent than if their married parents fight all the time. Spending years in a toxic or abusive household is much, much worse for children than navigating a parental separation. Obviously, shuffling between single-parent households every few days is not ideal, but neither is staying mired in chaotic conflict or an icy cold war. So if the adults, for whatever reason, can't find a way to get along with each other, I think it's often better for everyone involved if they go their separate ways. In my own personal experience, when my parents got divorced, things did get worse. Like, it does take time to accommodate to the new normal and to grieve the loss of the family. But then they got a whole lot better. And I think they got a whole lot better for everyone involved. Like, the existence of a legal contract is not a protective factor against the effects of physical or emotional abuse or neglect. Like, I've never heard anyone say, yeah, my mom beats and berates my dad, but hey, they're still married, so at least we got that going for us. What's best for children is to be raised in peaceful, loving, stable relationships. However, of these three factors, the first two are the most important because without the first two, the third factor is hell. Like, you don't win points if your conflictual and abusive relationship is stable. So if it's easier for parents to individually provide peaceful and loving environments, then we shouldn't necessarily chide the family structure for being unstable. In any case, divorce is not inherently bad for kids, but conflict and chaos and abuse and addiction absolutely are. If you appreciate the insights on this channel, I would highly encourage you to get your hands on a copy of my book, The Value of Others. Over the course of 432 pages, I delve deep into my economic model of relationships and explain the behavior of both men and women in the game of mating and dating. I also provide a lot of actionable advice on how to get and keep more of what you want in the sexual marketplace. Once you read The Value of Others, you'll never look at relationships the same way again. Now available in ebook, audiobook, and paperback formats. The links are in the description. Now let's address the protective factor argument. Unfortunately, the fact of the matter is that there is little a man can do to prevent these potential outcomes. Like, your woman could come home with papers today, and there is nothing you could do to prevent a divorce and its consequences. Marriage in today's day and age is a completely at-will relationship. It does not provide nearly the amount of security that people somehow still believe that it does. And the default arrangement, barring severe and documented abuse, neglect, or incompetence, irrespective of the reasons behind the divorce, is that the woman receives at least half custody of the children, at least. And however that person chooses to parent the kids when she has custody, including involving a stepfather, as long as it's not illegal and not in violation of the agreement, is kinda none of your business. And trying to make it your business will likely create a power struggle that would be very difficult to win. I'd like to submit that every man should understand that this is one of the possible outcomes that he could face if he decides to have children with his wife. He needs to accept the possibility not only that this could occur, but that there is functionally nothing he could do to prevent it should his wife one day have a mind to behave this way. And if he can't accept that possibility, he probably shouldn't get married and have kids. Preventing this outcome is just not in his domain of control. My point here is that putting up with abuse, neglect, or physical violence does absolutely nothing to prevent this outcome. Like, a woman can neglect and abuse you and still divorce you. The two variables don't actually have anything to do with one another. Pretending that they do is a coping mechanism. It's a way of feeling that you have some measure of control over something that ultimately is completely out of your control. And frankly, it isn't all that much different from what children do when they grow up in abusive households. The dysfunction is outside of their control, so they inappropriately take responsibility for it. Mommy and daddy fight because I'm a bad boy. Because even though this turns the child against himself, that condition is less painful than the powerlessness he currently feels. Putting up with things that people have no business putting up with does not prevent the feared outcome, because the feared outcome has always ever been outside of their control. And in the absence of any real consequences, relations will likely continue to deteriorate as well. Listen to me. Regardless of your real intentions, you should never, ever, ever allow your partner to believe that you will stay with them no matter what. Like, imagine how your workplace performance would change over time if you understood that you could never be fired no matter what you did or didn't do. Too much safety is dangerous, as the lack of appropriate consequences tends to make people monstrous. Not a good idea. Finally, this is the best point here. It's important for men in such situations to deeply consider what they are teaching their kids by choosing to stay in a toxic or abusive relationship for them. Because your kids are paying attention. Even if they don't know the extent or the specifics of your marital dysfunction, trust me, they know that something is wrong, which can be even more crazy-making because they can't put their finger on the source of their distress. What are you really teaching your kids? Imagine, in 30 years' time, your little girl comes to you and says, "Daddy, My husband hits me when he drinks too much. Be honest with yourself. Are you going to reply, well, sweetie, you made a vow, and it's going to be really hard on the kids if you separate, so you might need to suck it up and take one for the team here? Probably not, right? But that's precisely what you'd be teaching her to do by staying in a toxic or abusive relationship for her sake. And because she grew up in that abusive environment, and because you communicated with your behavior that abuse is tolerable, trust me, she is far, far more likely to end up in this hypothetical scenario than if you had behaved differently. By staying for the kids, you ultimately teach your children that their happiness doesn't matter. Their health doesn't matter. Their safety doesn't matter as soon as they become a parent. You teach your children that it's right and good to make a sacrifice of your own life so that someone else might potentially be happy. But look at your kids now. Are they happy? Like, does that sacrifice even work? I don't think it does. I don't think happiness can be transferred through sacrifice. It can't. So not only does this not work, but it imparts some pretty dangerous teachings to children that they are much more likely to replicate in their adult relationships. Ultimately, the idea here is to act in such a way that you would hope your children would act if they were in the same situation that you're currently in. Does that make sense? Because if you do any less, you're not actually doing much long-term good for your kids. If they end up in the exact same situation you're in, and they make the exact same decisions that you're currently making, how would you feel about that? How would you feel about that? Something to consider. What do you think? Does this fit with your own experience? Let me know in the comments below. And please, please, send this episode to someone who you think might benefit from its message, because it's word of mouth referrals like this that really help to make the channel and its mission grow. Anyone looking to join my free weekly newsletter or to book a paid one-on-one consultation can do so on my website. There's also my book on relationships, The Value of Others, and my member community, The Captain's Quarters. The links to everything are in the description below. Check them out. A lot of great resources there. As always, I appreciate your support, and thank you for listening.